there is one thing that my students have in common when it comes to music production. They always ask, how do you EQ kick, bass, percussion, leads, acids? So I thought it would be a great idea to show you guys how I do it. Make sure to stick around till the end of the video because I have a big present for you guys. And trust me, you don't want to miss this one. Now I prepared this absolutely simple project and we will be using only EQ and sidechain. Two, I think, most important parts of any track. So we're gonna start here in my kick bass group. And you know me, I love using LFO tool to visualize the waveform. So I'm gonna put it here on top. I have my presets saved here. Now we will be able to see how that kick and bass look like. Few things are happening. First, the kick is way lower in volume than the bass line, and also bass line is sort of phasing with our kick. We need to do a couple things to make this nice. First of all, I would make that kick a little bit louder. That appears to be like pretty okay. I still have this problem here. That can be easily fixed with sidechain. You can use anything. How about we use Kickstart? It can be LFO tool, it can be Shaper Box, whatever your favorite sidechain plugin is. The aim what we want to do is to completely cut out the bass from the kick. So I'm gonna choose this preset over here, move it a little bit into the middle, and I have my audio to trigger the kickstart. So let's choose kick for that. Now it's only going to work when the kick is playing. Let's have a look. And here we go, you can see there is no phasing here because there is no bass playing over here. Though we still have a problem. Look at that bass. Now we're gonna work on some EQ. There's one thing I'm missing about this kick, and most of the kicks have the same problem. If you use this little trick, your kicks will always stand out a little bit more. So the first thing I like to do is just like a simple low cut here at 10 Hz. And in case your kick is missing a little bit more punch, well, there is a sweet spot at around 120 Hz up to 130, where you can just increase the gain just a little bit and listen and look at the waveform, what's gonna happen with that kick. Suddenly it's getting like more of that punch. You can always tweak it where you think it sounds the best. To me, it's about 128 Hz. Yeah, you can really hear how it pumps. In case your kick is missing that little click, you can always boost around 7,000 to 8,000 Hz. So it's exactly that transient. If you want a little bit more transient, just a dB and a half will just suffice. This will make your kick to cut through the mix way better. So we have the punch and the click. Now we're gonna focus on the sub bass. We want to do something about this, which is called phasing. We have few options, we can move the phase or whatever, but in this case, I'm just gonna roll off those unnecessary frequencies here. I'm gonna click here, choose my curve and set it to 30 Hz. And voila, not there anymore. Also some phasing occurs, which sometimes can make your bass sound nicer, but be careful with it. If you don't like the phasing, you can always choose the simple 12 dB per octave slope. But as you can see, in this case, this makes them way nicer. Now sometimes the bass is just not sounding as nice as it could be. It is all down to the fundamental harmonics of the bass. Look at them. We have number 1, number 2, and then we have number 3. When I mix my tracks, I always like to have my first and second one pretty much in the same spot, because the second one is the one that cuts through the mix. The lower one usually is the one that fights with the kick, and it gives the track that low end. But if you want to hear that bass on your iPhone, or on your laptop, or on some really bad speakers, that's gonna be the fundamental that you want to raise up. So let's boost it up. And lower this one just a tiny bit. One little trick that I sometimes do to make that bass pop up a little bit more is to boost the third harmonic. That's where the magic happens. You can hear it's all sort of changes it as if it is like a FM bass. The thing is that your first and your second harmonic, those are your bass notes. Now in this case it's an E, but then you have the seventh, which in this case is the B. When you raise it up, it sort of gives that extra tonality to your bass line. In this case, I would just boost these like just a little bit because it's just enough. So let's compare. And I'm just gonna lower it down to maybe -8 dB. And this is where I'm happy. Next up would be the mid bass. We have several mid basses in trance music. We have the high mid, the low mid, the mid mid, and with so many mids. I usually just use one or two. I used to use 7, but not anymore. So here is our high mid and here is our low mid bass. So let's play the high first. It has some really nice transients. What I always do with my bass lines, especially the mid ones, is roll off everything below about 90 Hertz, sort of so I hit like 100 over here. Because I don't need this frequency. That's already being occupied by the kick and bass, so we don't need those. Now, if I do this, the bass might start to sound a little thin, so I'm gonna boost here in the number 2 just a little bit. And you can hear it suddenly getting some balls. If I want my bass, let's say, to cut through the mix a little bit better, especially when I'm in the intro of my track, always consider boosting the high end around like 11,000 Hertz. And you can hear it's like nicely cutting through. Also, you want to have a little bit more of that high mid, so that's when the 1000 just comes in. That's like that magical frequency for me. Let's add the low mid. And you can hear like this one is like beefy. Now with low mid, it's gonna be absolutely same as with the high mid. We're gonna roll off the low end because we don't need it. We're gonna boost a little bit here, but then we want to boost somewhere between 500 to 800 Hertz. Listen to that. It just adds that really raw sharpness to it. Let's play them all together. And you can see how they layer up and they add that really nice resonance in those low mids. There's one thing missing though, and that's the sidechain. In this case, maybe we can use the LFO tool. So you also see how I do it with LFO tool. Now I like to do these separately. On the high bass, I try to add a little bit less of sidechain because I want that bass to sort of make the track faster. While with the low mids, I always try to add a little bit more. So we're gonna pull it down here. Let's add the kick. Together then they sound like this. Now remember, this video is not about adding any saturation. This is purely about EQ. Now we're moving on to percussion. The first one we're gonna do is clap. Because clap is sort of tricky. If you wanna have it in your mix, like in like a very pretty place, this is how I would usually do it. If I look at the EQ of my clap, I will see 2 fundamental frequencies. The first one is going to be around here. Let's call it the mid. That's where that clap has the body. And then it's the high end, where that clap has that little sparkle. If I have a clap that doesn't sound great, I always roll off the low end. And then I add a little bit of mids and some sparkle, but it depends on how it sounds in the mix. Yeah, I like that. Let's compare how it sounded before. It's way nicer, but a little bit too loud. Let's put it down. And of course, we're gonna sidechain it. Why? Because we want to. We want that kick to cut through the mix. That should be the main razor thing that just cuts through and makes everybody go crazy. This time we're gonna use compressor from Ableton. Slap it on, set it to sidechain, turn on the EQ and audio input from your kick. Set it to peak and then just play around with the threshold and set the release to your liking. Okay, so the next one is the open hat. With open hats, this is a little bit tricky because you want them to cut through the mix, but they are very sharp and they really take up a lot of space in the EQ because they're sort of like noise when you think about it. All of these frequencies from like 200 Hertz up until 16,000. How do I know what to do with this to make it sit well in my mix? Well, the first thing I usually do is I boost the frequencies where I see that there is a very resonating frequency. So this frequency gives my hi-hat a little bit more body. And this one gives it a little bit more shine. And if I want it to really sparkle, of course, some high end. So in this case, I decided I'm gonna go for a little bit more body. And I'm gonna explain that right away on the ride. Because when you look at the ride and when they play together with the hi-hat, they're sort of not blending nicely together. I need to separate them. So how do I do that? I'm gonna add an EQ here, and if I'm going to have a look at it right and find its fundamental frequency, I see it's right here. So this is where I'm gonna boost. I'm gonna turn on this one where I chose different frequencies. And now I can hear more of that right. I can actually add a little bit more and roll off that low end. Again, if I wanted to sparkle a little bit more, I'm gonna boost right here. Now I can hear both. Don't stop there, because in this case, I really want this to sound great. So I'm gonna use the align delay. You can do this with any other effect which is capable of making a Haas effect. A Haas effect basically means that you have one side playing a little bit later than the other. You can do this manually. In Ableton, we have align delay, which is pretty neat. Set one side a little bit to the left. And now I can clearly hear both of the instruments playing together. Let's see how it sounds in the full track. And of course, if you're not happy with how that hi-hat sounds, you can always pitch it up or down. In this case, I would like to go up. Yeah, I liked it a little bit more. And you know what, while we're at it, let's turn it into a MIDI so it's easier to work with. Now I'm happy. Now we're gonna do the shaker. So this is the shaker that we're going to be using, and we want this to play nice in the mix. So again, a few things. Let's play these percussions together now. First thing I will always do, add an EQ on top. Roll off the low end, and then just look for the frequencies where you think it sounds good comparing to other percussion instruments that are playing right now. I would say somewhere around here it sounds great. One little tip, what I always like to do is to use a little bit of auto pan, you know, so it like pans left and right. The setup is pretty easy. You turn on the sync to song tempo and just add amount. The rate is 1/8. So basically means the 1/16, which is one little part here, is going to play left and the other one on the right. You don't want to go crazy, so let's just go for like 30-something%. Of course, this is going to need a sidechain. In this case, maybe we can use the compressor again, so it only works when the kick is playing. I'm gonna add a little bit longer release. Usually I like to go for 1/16 of a bar, which in this case is 109 milliseconds. It shows me down there. So let's click there, change it to 109. And here we go. Now I'm thinking maybe a little bit more sparkle would be nice. By the way, if your shaker doesn't sound as you want it, you can use a vocoder to just make it a little bit nicer. Put it right there in front of the EQ, click on the enhance and just add dry wet to your liking. That's how I like it. Yeah, that's good enough. By the way, guys, if you like what I'm showing you here today, there is way more on my channel and also on my website, readyformasterclass.com. I have just made a very new special masterclass that is limited to only 50 people, where I'll be showing you all the tricks and tips and all the special plugins that I use in order to make the tracks how I make them. If you want to know how I made the remixes for Armin van Buuren, Alain Vila, Garrett Emery, Marlo, and all the other guys, and all my biggest tracks, this masterclass is something that's going to show you how I actually do it. If you want to enroll, you should go do it now, because it's selling out pretty fast. We already sold out 25% in the first week. Now let's get back to mixing. Now the closed hat. I like to use it always separate and not when my other elements are playing. You can just have a look how I would EQ it when no other elements are playing. In this case, I don't like how it hisses, and I want this to boost up a little. That's all I need to do here. But if I play it with the open hat, I almost can't hear it. So this is like a very special tip for you guys. When there is something that you really can't hear in the track and it doesn't support the sound that you have there, you actually don't need to use it. So in this case, I don't need to use this closed hat. I will use it, but maybe before, just to enhance the tempo of the track without all the other percussion. So let's see what we did and how it all sounds together. That's pretty cool. Next up is going to be a crash, and I'm going to be showing you how to actually make your own crash. Because, you know, let's face it, there are so many of them, but the 909 crash is just the best. And that's it. We want to enhance it a little bit. And here comes the fun. So the first thing we're going to add is a delay. We're going to add just enough, about 3/4 and about 25%. Actually, you can do 4/4, maybe nicer. So it gives you more of that tail. And now, here comes the EQ. All you want to do is just to mess around it so it plays great in your mix. And I always like to boost around 1400 Hertz just because there is this beautiful noise on top of it. Let's see what's gonna happen if I just boost there. Let's roll off the low end. And maybe I want to add a little bit more mids. Same applies if you want your crash pitched up a little bit. Makes it stand out a little bit more, and now you have your own crash. You can actually add a little bit of reverb, nothing too crazy, and put it just before your delay, because you want that reverb to be delayed, so it like goes a little bit longer. And all you want, just less of the high cut, and maybe like 5 seconds of the decay, and a little bit of dry wet. Let's have a listen to it on its own. And I have no idea why I have this LFO tool here, so I'm gonna delete it. That was a little mistake. I'm gonna actually add a sidechain on top of that as well, just so it doesn't really crash too much. Let's play it in the mix. Highlight everything using Shift, Group, and let's turn it off. You can hear how it nicely cuts through the mix. Of course, you can play around with it and just find the frequencies that you like the most. Okay, and let's turn it down, maybe to -16. If you need a little bit more body, I suggest around 600 Hertz. And that's it. Let's do the reverse crash. Now this is gonna be very easy. We're gonna copy all of these little settings that I just created and paste it right here. And now I will have my own beautiful reverse crash. I want to have way more reverb and it needs to be way longer. Let's add the sidechain to the kick, so the tail is going to be sidechained while the rest is not. Beautiful. Let's add some more reflection and diffuse. Now I'm not really happy about that mid sound, so I'm just gonna roll it off and maybe just cut it out. Now let's see how they play together. Now, if you want, you can actually pitch this down, then it sounds pretty interesting. If you want a little bit more delay, you can add it. It always helps and makes it sound a little bit nicer. Especially in trance. Next up is going to be the snare roll. Now, snare roll is a very special instrument because when you look at snare, you will see that there are several fundamental frequencies. The first one is here in the bottom. And then you have the second one, which is right here. See, about like high mids. The bottom one determines the key of your snare. So if you want to have your snare in key, which usually really helps, then you can see where it is and pitch it up and down. It also helps to get some more punch onto the snare. So if you boost here, you can hear that. If you boost here, that adds a little bit more noise on the transient. So I always like to boost like a little bit more here and there to taste, because I don't want this to be super crazy too much. And of course, we're gonna be rolling off that low end. Because the kick is playing in this part, we're gonna need to add a little bit of sidechain. And I just noticed it says ReOrder. Let's play this part over here, all together with everything. Next up is the white noise. White noise is a very special effect because if you look at it, it's made out of noise. So the EQ is usually spread around the whole thing. Few things that you don't want. There is this huge low end coming through. Which I don't want to hear this, especially at the start. Until here, this is where I like it. And that's when I come in and just roll this off. Sometimes there's this frequency, especially in trance music, where it just really resonates in your ears, and it's usually around here from about 8 to 10,000 Hertz. So that's when I'm going to roll it off. And I want to have a little bit more sparkle on the start. because that's when my track starts and I really like it. Now let's add a sidechain. Let's play it together, maybe from here. Now let's get to the most exciting part. That would be plucks, leads, and pots and acids, because those are the instruments that we're gonna be needing a lot. Let's start with acid. With acid, many people think that it's important to boost the high end, sort of like this. But when you look at how acid looks and how it plays, you see that there are some fundamental frequencies that sound really great. And one thing that acid always needs is a body. And that body is in your low mids. So that's what you're gonna boost. But first things first, let's roll off the low end. And now let's boost that. The second one is around 1200 Hertz. That's when the acids usually shine. Let's see how it sounds in the mix. So in this case, in this type of acid, I wanted to also add a little bit more sparkle here. I'm gonna show you a little trick. If you use ReOrder or any other multi-band saturation, just change this to multi-band and then come over here to your mids and your highs and boost. Of course, don't forget to roll off the volume because it's gonna be loud. So it's a really nice background acid. So remember, roll off the low end, add a little bit more low mids and play around in the high mids so you get that beautiful sound of that acid to cut through the mix. Now we're gonna get to the pads. We have a pad here that plays just like this. There's one thing that will not sound very well when this whole thing is playing. So I'm gonna show you what I mean by that. I'm gonna play the kick and bass together with my pads. So first thing I can hear, it sounds a little dull. So I'm gonna add some more high end. And you can hear that noise is what fills the whole track. And I know that many people just use like a noise channel in their tracks. Please don't do that. Just play around with the EQ. We're gonna do similar things with the leads. So now you have to be very careful. Let's roll off the low end. And now let's add a little bit of mids where we think it sounds good. Usually it's around 4000 Hertz, but you never know. You have to test it out and listen. Pretty cool, but we also lack a little bit of low mid with this preset, so we're gonna add a little bit more here. Now to save this whole thing from being just like a complete mix killer, we're gonna add the LFO tool to about 50% would be just enough. Now I'm pretty happy. Problem starts when we add the leads, because they are saw leads that we use in trance, and this was the saw pad. So what do we need to do? Let's play them together and let's see where they find for space. Well, right now everywhere, because we need to EQ that lead first. So let's start with the leads. First thing, roll off the low end. I usually go for about 130 to 140 Hertz. And again, I want to add a little sparkle. For this, I'm gonna go for 13,500 Hertz. And I'm gonna boost about 2 dB on a very sharp cue. So you can hear how it adds the little sparkle there. If you want, you can add more. But I find it ear piercing, so let's settle for 2 and maybe wider cue. Now the next beautiful frequency of this leads would be somewhere in the high mids, so let's look for it. That's a good one. I like it. It really made it stand out, but how about if it plays with the pad? So we see here, I boosted about 3,800, while on leads, I boosted about 1000 Hertz lower. What it means that we can hear it a little bit better. Listen to what's gonna happen when I move it to those 3,800. So you can hear the lead sort of disappearing. That's why I try to boost the leads and pods in different frequencies so I get the best from both worlds. But I also still miss a little bit of high end on high mid, so about 8000 Hz would be kind of nice. And if you need to add a little bit more body to your leads, 400 to 500 Hz is where I like to boost. Now we're gonna play it together, but first I'm gonna take the LFO tool again and put it on my leads, just so they are sidechained and a little bit less than the pads. Now I'm not really happy about how the lead sounds because I believe it's like on a wrong octave, so I'm gonna put it 1 octave higher. Oh, that's better. Let's play this now. And now the last thing, the pluck. This is a little bit tricky and you have to be very careful because you want it to cut through the mix but not be too empowering. It just should be like a support sound, especially as a counter melody. Let's play it with the leads and pods and let's see what we can do to make it stand out more. So I always look for the frequencies around the spectrum where that sound suddenly pops up, but it doesn't feel like it's imposing too much, you know, it just needs to be like subtle and there. Let's have a listen again. It's pretty cool. Let's turn off the leads. See, now I'm missing a little bit of the body, but that's because I don't have any bass lines playing. So if I add this here, it's gonna feel like there's more body. And there definitely is. But I'm gonna boost just a tiny little bit of the low mids. The last thing that we are missing is a sidechain. So I'm gonna add it over here. And now let's have a final listen how it sounded before and after. Now you can see what an EQ can do for your track. But before you go, guys, I promised you that there's gonna be a gift. I didn't want you to just, watch this video over and over like a crazy person. I actually created a very special EQ cheat sheet that you can download right away on readyformasterclass.com. The link is in the description. Feel free to use it, and I hope it's gonna help you mix your tracks faster and better. And that's all for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm looking forward to see you for the next video. Ciao.